Last week, our now Secretary of War, Hegseth, came out and he was speaking at Fort Benning, Georgia, and he said, I'm here in Fort Benning, and he said something along the lines of, the name that it should be. Now, I find this to be very disturbing, and if you are not as equally disturbed as I am, that there is this resurgence on the right to glorify and to worship the Confederacy, then you're really doing a disservice to our history and to our country as a whole. And before I say anything else, I think it's very important to make the point that I don't understand the politics around Confederate worship and neo-Confederates. There is nothing wrong with being a staunch conservative, a right-leaning individual, even a Trump supporter, and drawing the line when it comes to glorifying and worshiping a country that existed for the sole purpose of continuing the system of African slavery forever. The fact that the second that anyone comes out and says the Confederacy was bad, neo-Confederates are not a good thing, we shouldn't be making monuments and statues to Confederate war heroes, and we shouldn't be naming U.S. military bases after Confederate generals, you're immediately accused of being on the left. My friends, this isn't a left or right issue. This is cold, hard truth. And if you genuinely want to believe in America's potential or American greatness or American exceptionalism, part of that is also accepting that there are some very bleak areas of our past in our history and coming to terms with that and studying it and teaching it for what it actually was. That the antebellum South and the Confederacy was a society, a slave society, founded on white supremacy. And we can acknowledge that and study it and learn from it and move on. Now, again, this channel is not about politics. This channel is not about political opinions or anything like that. It is simply to show the horrors of the antebellum slaveocracy and the white supremacist foundations of the system of African slavery in the United States. And to that end, I am 100% against Confederate worship and neo-Confederates. I think it's obscene. And now we have to say one thing here, that Fort Benning, as they reverted the name back to Fort Benning, one of the things that the right tried to do here, or the neo-Confederates for that matter, because again, I don't want to lump everyone who believes in Confederate greatness with people on the right. That'd be doing exactly what I'm accusing other people of doing. So forgive me there. But one of the things that this neo-Confederate resurgent group is trying to do, or tried to do, was to change the names of all the military bases back to their original names, but now naming them after non-Confederate heroes. So Fort Benning is now in theory named after someone else other than Henry Benning. But don't pee on me and tell me it's raining, right? When Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, says, it's back to the way that it should be, well, there's a reason why you believe that. So we know that as far as he's concerned, Fort Benning has its traditional name. Now, who is it named after? Now, look, I have a connection with Fort Benning. I was there. I was at Airborne School, class 2801, the summer before 9/11, I believe May and June of 2001. And full disclosure, I didn't serve. I was a cadet at Valley Forge Military Academy. That's me. And I got the chance to go to Airborne School, so I was in Fort Benning, and I know what a god-awful place it actually is. But joking aside, let's see who it's named after, and then I want to ask people, if you are African-American, if you are, truly into this idea of American exceptionalism, American greatness, how can you stand to have United States military bases named after not only Confederate heroes and Confederate generals, but men like Henry Benning, who truly exemplified the Confederate cause? This idea that Caucasians are the superior race of white supremacy, and that the natural condition for Africans is to be one of enslavement to whites, and that the Confederacy existed. The reason that Henry Benning fought as a Confederate Army officer was to protect the institution of African slavery. So let's understand this. So Henry Benning was a Confederate brigadier general. He was also an attorney. He was a lawyer. And forgive me, I'm still getting over this. I actually had COVID, so I'm coughing nonstop. But I believe that the march against neo-Confederates never needs to go on regardless of how I'm feeling. So just deal through the video of me coughing on you every couple of minutes. But He was an attorney. He was a legislator before the Civil War, and he eventually ended up on the Georgia State Supreme Court. So he was a powerful and influential man. And after the end of the Civil War, he actually went back to Georgia and continued to serve as an attorney. So in the 1840 census, we know that Benning owned at least 20 slaves in Muskogee County, Georgia. 10 years later, by the 1850 census, we see that he owned 60 slaves in that county. So he was not only a slave owner, he was a large slave owner, and his property and slaves continued to grow up until the end of slavery with the 13th Amendment. So Benning was an ardent secessionist, and he believed in secession because he believed the only way that slavery could be preserved was if they created a new pro-slavery nation. In 1849, he wrote to Hal Cobb, and if you are a viewer of this channel, you are familiar with the name Cobb. Hal Cobb is the brother of big citation on this channel to Thomas R.R. Cobb, the Georgia jurist who wrote An Inquiry into the Laws of Negro Slavery in the United States. But Hal Cobb was a very powerful man in his own right. He was a 5-time member of the House of Representatives. He was the 40th governor of Georgia. He was Secretary of the Treasury under James Buchanan. So he's best known for, forget his service to the United States, he's best known perhaps for being the provisional president of the Confederate States Congress. So as delegates were coming together to create the Confederate States of America, he was in effect the man in charge before Jefferson Davis was appointed the first president of the Confederacy. So he was the president of the Provisional Confederate Congress. So Benning wrote a letter to Hal Cobb in the late 1840s. And what he said was, quote, "Now, having said so much to you on your own account, it is proper that I tell you in a few words my position on the slavery question and the duty of the South, in order that you may make due allowance for anything in what I have said which appears exaggerated or extreme. I think then first that the only safety of the South from universal abolition is to be found in an early dissolution of the Union." So he's saying to Hal, hey, look, I think we need to speed this up. We need to break the Union apart now if we want to protect slavery. He says, I think that the Union, by its natural and ordinary working, is giving anti-slaveryism such a preponderance in the general government, both by adding to the number of free states and diminishing the number of slave, that it will soon be able to abolish slavery by act of Congress and then to execute the law. I no more doubt that the North will abolish slavery the very first moment it feels itself able to do it without too much cost than I doubt my existence. So he's warning Howell here. He's saying, look, the North, the abolitionists are becoming too strong. The second they get enough power, they're going to use the federal government, the general government, to abolish slavery, and we can't have that. So what is his suggestion? I think that as a remedy for the South, dissolution is not enough, and a Southern Confederacy not enough. So before we look, he's saying, look, just breaking away is not enough. You're going to see how much of an extremist Benning actually was. And yet we have a military base named after this man. So if you're an African American, you served in Fort Benning, are you really okay with this? But let's keep going. Let's see how extreme Benning actually was. He said the latter would not stop the process by which some states, Virginia, for example, are becoming free by ridding themselves of their slaves. So Benning from Georgia is looking at states like Virginia and saying, look, if we break away and we join with other slaveholding states like Virginia, there's a problem because Virginia is actually slowly emancipating slaves and looks like they're on the way out, and this is Benning's opinion, looks like they're on the way out from being a slave state. So what he's saying is if we join with states like Virginia, he goes on to say in time, we should have, again, a confederacy with a North and a South. He's going, look, if we join with these states that are slowly emancipating and looking like they're going down the path towards abolition, even though they're slaveholding states now, we're just going to end up where we are right now with a North and a South, and that's not going to protect our institution of slavery. He said the only thing that will do when tried every way is a consolidated republic formed of the southern states. That will put slavery under the control of those most interested in it, and nothing else will. And until that is done, nothing is done. So he's saying, I don't just want a slaveholding country. I want an extreme slave society where the states that have the most vested interest in slavery in this consolidated republic are the ones in charge of protecting it. So he doesn't just want a Confederate States of America. He wants an extreme Confederate States of America where slaveholding is protected to the extreme. He finishes by saying, "You see, therefore, that I am very extreme in my opinions, and that you must weigh them as you weigh what I recommend to you." So that just shows you Benning's personal belief of why he would end up fighting to protect the Confederate States of America. It's because he was a staunch enslaver. He believed in the system of African slavery, and he was going to do anything possible to protect that system in his state of Georgia. So that was his letter to Hal Cobb. Now, he eventually goes to the Virginia Convention. Virginia had not yet seceded, so many of the states that did secede, Georgia for an example, the original states that seceded from the Union, sent delegates to the Virginia Convention to try and convince Virginia to secede and join the Confederacy. So Henry Benning gave a speech to the Virginia Convention. And I've chopped it up for you, the key points here, because it does go on forever and it rambles. But just so you can see what this man believed about Africans, what this man believed about slavery, and why this man fought to preserve and protect the Confederate States of America. He started by saying, "What was the reason that induced Georgia to take the step of secession? The reason may be summed up in one single proposition. It was a conviction, a deep conviction on the part of Georgia, that a separation from the North was the only thing that could prevent the abolition of her slavery." So why did Benning believe Georgia seceded? To protect the system of African slavery founded in white supremacy. Why did he fight for the Confederacy? To preserve and protect the institution of African slavery in the United States. He continues, "When that time comes, the time will have arrived when the North will have the power to amend the Constitution." So he's now saying, what's going to happen when the North gets powerful enough to abolish slavery, when that time comes. So the North will have the power to amend the Constitution and say that slavery shall be abolished. And if the master refuse to yield to this policy, he shall doubtlessly be hung for his disobedience. So he's warning Virginia, if you stay with the North, this is what's going to end up happening. Eventually they're going to abolish slavery, and those of you who are not going to want to give up your slaves are going to be hung for it. He goes on, "My proposition, then I insist, is true that the North is acquiring this power. That being so, the only question is, will she exercise it? Of course she will, for her whole course shows that she will. By the time the North shall have attained the power, the black race will be in a large majority. And then we will have black governors, black legislatures, black juries, black everything." And then there's quotes here that apparently the convention started to laugh. So, is it to be supposed the white race will stand for it? It is not a supposable case. So, of course, Benning's saying, look, if this is what's going to happen, there's going to be black majorities, black governors, black legislatures, black juries. White people are not going to stand for it. So what's going to happen? Although not half so numerous, we may readily assume that war will break out everywhere like hidden fire from the earth. And it is probable that the white race, being superior in every respect, got to throw in the white supremacy there, may push the other back. They will then call upon the authorities at Washington. So he's saying what this is going to create is a race war. There's going to be black versus white. Whites, because they're superior, are going to end up pushing the blacks back. Then the blacks are going to call on Washington, the federal government, to aid them. And the whites in the South are also going to call on Washington to put down this servile insurrection that's going on. He's painting this one very convoluted and crazy picture of the race war between enslaved and master and the ending of slavery that's going to happen if and when the Virginia stays with the North and the Republicans take power and they try and push for the abolition of slavery. So they will call upon Washington to aid them in putting down servile insurrection, and they will send a standing army down upon us, and the volunteers and wide awakers will come in the thousands, and we will be overpowered, and our men will be compelled to wander like vagabonds all over the earth. As for our women, the horrors of their state we cannot contemplate in imagination. This is the fate which abolition will bring upon the white race. So pretty much abolition will cause the white race to be attacked, to be beaten down by a black majority that will eventually take place with a black government, and all of this, it's going to be pandemonium, pandalirium, the sounds of pigs being slaughtered. Virginia, you can't have this. Of course, the only option for the white race is for you to secede and to continue the system of African slavery. But he doesn't finish there. But that is not all of the abolition war. We will be completely exterminated, and the land will be left in the possession of the blacks, and it will then go back into a wilderness and become another Africa or St. Domingo. Sir, this is the abolition. This is abolition to the cotton states. Would you blame us if we sought a remedy to avert that condition of things? So, who was Benning? A brigadier general in the Confederate Army who was a staunch secessionist, who believed in white supremacy, who believed that Georgia and the other southern states, slaveholding states, needed to secede to preserve and protect the institution of African slavery based on white supremacy, and who was willing to give his life to fight for the cause. Now, he didn't die in the Civil War, but he was a soldier, he was a general, so he was willing to give his life to fight for white supremacy and to keep Africans, people of African descent, enslaved to Caucasians in the Confederate States of America. So why, again, are we naming military bases after these people? Why, if you are an African American, would you want to serve in a base named after a man? Why do we name things after people? It's to honor them. In fact, the plaque that talks about Fort Benning being named after Henry Benning here says it's named in his honor. Why are we honoring him? Why is Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, saying back to the way that it should be? Why should it have ever have been Fort Benning if this is the man that they were trying to honor? This isn't a left or a right issue. This isn't a conservative or a liberal issue, a Democrat or a Republican issue. This is American history. This is the system of African slavery that was founded in white supremacy that these Confederate generals fought and many died for. There is no reason that we should be honoring any of these men in statues, in memorials, and especially not in naming military bases after them, or in trying to find some way to dance around that and return the name to that original name when we all know what people are trying to do. So as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you for the next video.